Hello, everyone. My name is Brendan Moore. That noise you're hearing is my ventilator. And thank you for tuning in to Page Turners They Were Not, my Star Wars podcast. Today, I'm recording this on a Thursday. And Thursdays are the day we talk about nostalgia as it pertains to Star Wars. But today, I'd like to go a little bit further and talk about the effect that the sequels to the original Star Wars film had on the film industry, particularly at that time, which in a way continues to this very day. Heck, who are we kidding? It really continues to this very day. So let's look at the effect of these sequels. The Empire Strikes Back was, I believe at the time, the most financially successful sequel ever made. Now, at that particular time in history, film history, sequels were not as common as they are today. Occasionally, a popular Western might get a sequel, like I think The Magnificent Seven did, and Support Your Local Sheriff, and you'd have the James Bond films, which are sequels of a sort. They don't really have much of a continuity. And you'd have Godfather Part 2, which of course was a big success and is the only sequel to have both the original and the sequel win Best Picture at the Academy Awards. And so it's fairly uncommon to see sequels. But I think the mammoth success of The Empire Strikes Back in 1980 was a launch pad for what we're calling sequelitis. And this is not the good kind of sequelitis. This is back when sequels usually kept going down in quality. Nowadays, we are lucky to live in a time where movies in a franchise are not subject to that. If you look at the MCU, for instance, they have clearly not lost any creative steam. Because I think the trick to a good sequel is not just rehashing the original. Now, if you look in the 80s, this was the beginning of sequelitis. And not a good point as far as the quality was concerned. Now, before we get into that, it's important to place Star Wars in its historical context. Now, you could fill a whole book about this, and you can also fill an entire book about the effect Star Wars had on the film industry. But let's look at the time. The original Star Wars film was released in 1977, toward the tail end of what is called New Hollywood. In the 50s and 60s, you were seeing a rise in foreign imports as far as film was concerned. The art house cinema of Italy and France and other countries, but mostly those two, were making headway in the United States. And a lot of filmmakers, young filmmakers, like George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, on and on and on, were influenced by these films to take a more artistic stab at film. Now, up to that point, the studio system dominated Hollywood. Occasionally, you would have directors with more unique visions, but usually it was pretty much your by-the-numbers filmmaking. And there's nothing wrong with that, because this era produced some of the most amazing films ever made. And the irony is that these Italian and French artsy filmmakers like Federico Fellini and Francois Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard were influenced by watching the American classics and then making their movies. The success of movies like Jules and Jim, 8½, 400 Blows, really got into the minds of the young American filmmakers at that time. The studio system was coming to an end, which also meant what is called the Hays Code was coming to an end. The Hays Code was a decency code that had very strict guidelines about what was allowed to be seen on screen and film. Hays Code and the old studio system of rather rigid filmmaking ideas were coming to an end. Hollywood as a whole began to realize that tastes were changing. And the beginning of what they call New Hollywood is traditionally marked as 1967, with the incredible success of movies like The Graduate and the movie that arguably changed it all, Bonnie and Clyde. Now, I have to confess to you, I have not seen Bonnie and Clyde, but I am aware of the impact it had on Hollywood. The success it had financially was gargantuan. Now, I don't think it made, like, we're not talking, it didn't make Star Wars numbers of money. But the fact that you have this violent, rule-breaking, anti-hero movie that breaks every rule when it comes to, I guess, what Hollywood has established. I don't mean it breaks the rules artistically, but it definitely breaks the rules of what was commonplace at that point. A movie about bad guys? Oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. You know, usually in the old days, if they were bad, they would get their comeuppance and die horribly. And you'd be happy that they died. They turned things on their head. Arthur Penn turned things on its head. If I'm not mistaken, that was the director of Bonnie and Clyde. Now, the success of this movie made Hollywood realize these movies that break all the rules might be something we might want to consider. Shifting our focus more today. And as the 60s progressed toward 1970, the change was pretty quick. Hollywood went, you know what? You young filmmakers, you forward-thinking filmmakers, here's your money. Go make the movie. Go make your movies. Go make your artistic statements. You be in charge. We'll oversee it. And we'll distribute it. So these young filmmakers were given an incredible burst of freedom to make the movies that they wanted to make. Sometimes we call this auteur cinema. Auteur is French for author. The idea that the director is an author in their film the way a writer is the author of their book. And so there was this unbridled freedom. Not entirely unbridled, but more freedom than had ever been known in Hollywood. Particularly with the success of movies like The Graduate, Bonnie and Clyde, Easy Rider, which ended up becoming one of the most profitable films in movie history. And I mean that because it was made for like less than $500,000 and ended up grossing like $45 million plus. So incredibly profitable. Demonstrated that audiences wanted to connect with these more countercultural movies, which is interesting because the counterculture movement was in full swing at that point. The hippie movement. So, Star Wars comes out in that time period. Now, Star Wars is sort of toward the tail end. And I'll probably dedicate an entire episode to how Star Wars might have brought the end of New Hollywood. But the traditional end of New Hollywood is considered to have happened in 1980 with the colossal box office failure of Heaven's Gate. Michael Cimino, fresh off his success with the movie The Deer Hunter, which made good money and won Best Picture at the Oscars, went off to make Heaven's Gate, which is a revisionist Western of sorts about immigrants being mistreated as they came to the West, the United States. Gee, imagine immigrants being mistreated by the man. Probably a more timely message nowadays than it was then. Regardless, the film was a colossal financial failure. It cost like $40 million to make. It made $3 million at the theater. Yeah, now I've seen it, and I think it's fantastic. Or, well, parts of it are really, really good, I think. Maybe I chose my word poorly. I think it's good. I think certain parts of it I'm like, ooh, I like this. This is fantastic. As a whole, I wouldn't say it's fantastic, but I thought it was good. But if you want to know the venom that movie received when it came out from the critics, go and look it up. It's quite a read. So, the critics hated it. Nobody went and saw it, or barely anybody. And it failed terribly. And Hollywood put the brakes on New Hollywood and on tour cinema. Because money talks in Hollywood. Because making movies is a business. And so they reined in the directors and decided to go a different direction. And it is my hypothesis that the direction they chose to go in was sequels. Particularly because of the success of The Empire Strikes Back. I think that Hollywood saw, oddly enough, Empire Strikes Back came out the same year as Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate was part of the New Wave Hollywood. New Hollywood, and failed. Empire Strikes Back was a sequel and succeeded. Though arguably you could count The Empire Strikes Back as being part of New Hollywood. Because the traditional end of New Hollywood is Heaven's Gate. But it didn't end all at once. It kind of depends on who you ask. Some might say Blade Runner was the last of the New Wave. Some might say E.T., some might say King of Comedy in 1983, Martin Scorsese's overlooked film, which, by the way, shameless plug, if you have not seen The King of Comedy by Martin Scorsese, please check it out. It's pretty awesome. In a dark comedy kind of way. Really dark. So it depends on who you ask, but I think that it's interesting that because of the Empire Strikes Back success, you started to see sequelitis in the 80s. And this was sequels to movies such as Lethal Weapon, Beverly Hills Cop, Naked Gun, Police Academy, Ghostbusters. You really started to see a plethora of sequels. Some were good, like Aliens is quite good. And others, the quality went down with each new entry in the series. The Karate Kid sequels, anyone? Good. I think the less said about those, the better. So all in all, I believe that the success of The Empire Strikes Back led to the rise in sequels. But unfortunately, it would seem like Hollywood got the wrong idea. In order to make a good sequel, you need to make a good movie. I think that there was a bit of a degree of, well, this movie made a lot of money, let's make a sequel, but not put a lot of effort into it. Sometimes they end up being lazy rehashes, very unoriginal, very uninspired. But at the same time, you did get a bunch of good sequels. I always say that progress is a double-edged sword. The same is true in cinema. Every good thing, every successful movie that comes out is going to have positive effects and negative effects on the Hollywood film industry, heck, just the American film industry as a whole. And I'd say this probably holds true for international cinema as well. The success of Star Wars as a franchise has caused good things to happen and caused bad things to happen. That is the nature of any successful movie. Especially on the level of success with something like The Empire Strikes Back. I believe that if The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi were not successful, critically, financially, and a hit with audiences, as far as audiences liking them, if those things did not happen, I would probably not be sitting here talking about Star Wars on this podcast. I firmly believe that Star Wars is great on its own. But without the sequels, it would not be the mammoth franchise it is today. And I would certainly not be sitting here telling you all about the history of Star Wars. So I believe that The Empire Strikes Back to this day is probably the greatest sequel ever made and the benchmark for all good sequels. Every time a good sequel comes out, it's The Empire Strikes Back of its saga. Especially if it's a trilogy or whatnot. The Dark Knight, I think, is The Empire Strikes Back of the Dark Knight saga. Of Christopher Nolan's Batman saga. I think that still to this day, we are seeing the effects of these good sequels. And film would not be where it is today, both for good and evil, if The Empire Strikes Back was not a success. So those are my thoughts on the matter. Let me know what you think. My name is Brendan Marr. That noise you're hearing is my ventilator. And thank you for tuning in to Page Turners They Were Not, my Star Wars podcast. May the Force be with you.